Hey friends, welcome to Sojo Videos. My name is Joan and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a DIY boba holder. After my recent trip to Taiwan, which I just came back from, vlogs to come soon, I realized that boba cup holders are actually really common there, and so I decided to DIY and knit my own. This is a super easy DIY knitting project, especially for people who are just beginning to learn how to knit, as it's essentially just knitting one rectangle to wrap around your boba cup and then a super long rectangle to act as your handle. And it should end up looking something like this. So handy, you can even wear it as a purse. So it's perfect if you're addicted to drinking boba like I am. Materials and timestamps are listed down below in the description. But with that, I think we're ready to get started. So on with the tutorial. So of course, first thing you'll need is your yarn and of course your knitting needles. And this is the size that I use. We're gonna start off by casting on our yarn onto our needle. So I'm first gonna be making a slip knot. After crossing over the end of the yarn, I'm gonna pull it through the circle that I've made, but instead of leading with the end, I'm gonna lead with the side of the string, and pulling it through should make a loop just like so. I'm going to put that onto my needle and tighten it just by pulling the ends of the yarn. Now I'm going to show you guys how to cast on my stitches. So with the yarn that's connected to the ball of yarn, I'm going to use my index finger to twist and slip it onto my needle. Once I've looped it on, I'm going to pull the yarn so it tightens it onto the needle. Again, the motion I'm doing is putting my index finger underneath the yarn and then on top before looping it on. Just keep repeating that, and each time I do that, that's going to count as one stitch. You're going to want 11 in total on your needle. The actual amount of stitches we're dealing with is 10, but the first one we put on with the slip knot doesn't count, since the next time we'll knit a row, it's going to unravel itself. Once you count 11 stitches on your needle, we can then get started on the actual knitting process. So taking my free needle, I'm going to stab it through the first stitch, going underneath the needle that has stitches. I'm then going to loop some yarn around the bottom needle. Then I'm going to take the bottom needle and slowly slip it out from underneath the top needle. And what I want is for the point of the needle to go through the stitch on top of the other needle and then pull it off. Since it's the very first row we're stitching, it might take a little bit of effort to pull it off. Just make sure that this is what it ends up looking like. So you'll notice that the stitch has moved over to the other needle. If you count them all up, in total they should be 11, but one of them is now on the other needle. And that's basically what we're going to keep repeating for the knitting process. So again, stabbing my needle through underneath, putting yarn around, and then pulling that stitch over to the other needle. If this is your first time knitting, don't worry about going too fast. With lots of practice, it'll basically become muscle memory and you won't have to think about it that hard. Now once I've made all my stitches except for the last one, I'm basically just going to pull it off my other needle and unravel it. So you should be left with 10 stitches in total on the needle that has all the stitches now. You might also notice having some free yarn left over from when we cast it on. Most people cut it off, but I'm actually going to be keeping it on to use it for a next part of the DIY. Now we're just going to basically keep on knitting using the same process over and over again until we have enough rows that once we put both ends of the rectangle we're making together, it should form a circle that is large enough to stretch around a boba tea cup. But yeah, thankfully this project I would say is probably easier because we're basically just making two rectangles, one that's a little bit thicker and shorter and one that's a little thinner but a lot longer, which is going to be the handle of the boba cup holder. Now this is just an extra step that I like to take that definitely I don't think is required. But since I'm very paranoid, I like to make a knot with the free hanging end of the yarn that's still hanging off of where we first cast it on. It just gives me peace of mind. However, I'm still not cutting it off since I will be using it later. Now I'm also going to be counting the rows I've stitched on. In this you can see that I've knitted 2 rows so far. As you continue knitting, you should start to notice the rows that are being made. And depending on how tight or how loose your stitches are when you knit, it's going to also affect how many rows that you actually want to stitch on, because the looser you do your stitches, the more stretchy your thing is going to be. So for the actual cup holder portion that we're knitting right now, I personally knitted up to 19 to 20 rows, where my knitting was stretchy enough to fit over a boba cup but not loose enough to make it fall through. Now, I'm just providing those numbers as a reference for you, but I would definitely still recommend testing it out as you're knitting to see how stretchy your knitting is, as you'll actually see me do later. Now here you can see me counting up my rows once again. I've now knitted on 4 rows, and so of course there's still a bit more more to go. As I knit, I always like to play something in the background, so featuring Mission Impossible. I think knitting is a great way to relax while also watching stuff and still feeling productive since you are making something by hand. And again, once you get used to it, it basically becomes a muscle memory of how to knit, so you can kind of just go into kind of a flow state and just basically chill and relax. And just to give a few pointers for knitting, make sure to move your stitches to the tip of your needle so it's a bit easier to put on all your stitches. And it's good to get in the habit of counting your stitches so you make sure you haven't dropped any or added any that you didn't mean to. And I'm by no means a fast knitter. I'm pretty sure the way I hold my needles is also very not correct, but it didn't take me long to kind of get enough rows to kind of show what it would look like if I were to loop it around as we want to do for the cup holder portion. Okay guys, I got a cup that we finished drinking boba out of, and I filled it with water to see. This is what it's looking like. I've got around 20 rows. It will be in a circle like this, like a little sleeve. We're gonna see if the cup can fit. Oh man. Mom, can you help me? Everyone say hello to my mother. She rarely makes an appearance on the DIY video on the channel, mostly in the vlogs. Okay, I need you to help me put this in. There we go. Yes. Okay. That's pretty solid. The idea is that I don't want it to like fully obviously slip through. Obviously we'll have the two handles like this. It looks pretty stable. Okay, I think 20 rows of stitches is the way to go. Thank you. Everyone give a round of applause. Time to cast off. So to cast off, we're just gonna knit 2 stitches onto our needle as normal. And once we have that 2 stitches, we're gonna take the first stitch that we put on, so the stitch that's underneath, and we're gonna pull it over the tip of our needle so that we only have 1 left, just like so. Make sure to do it carefully so you don't slip both of them accidentally off. And you should notice that you're now 1 stitch less, so it should have 9 stitches in total. Then we just repeat the process. This time I'm just gonna stitch 1 on. We always wanna have 2 on our needle. And then again, taking the one that was originally on it, so the bottom one, and slipping it off. And that is basically what casting off is gonna look like. So just repeating, stitching 1 stitch on so that you have 2, and then slipping off the original one over the new stitch that you made. You should notice your rectangle starting to form its corner and forming an edge. And that's how you know that you're casting off properly. Now we're gonna keep knitting and casting off until we only have 2 stitches left on our right needle. And again, you want to go about this last stitch just as normal, so putting your needle through, wrapping your yarn around, and then pulling it off. It should end up with 2 stitches on your needle, just like so. Now repeating the same thing, I'm going to take my original stitch, pull it over and off of the needle so you only have 1 left. But for this one, I'm going to pull my needle so it kind of forms a loop, snip off my yarn, and pull that end of the yarn through the loop to make a knot. This is going to secure your piece and ensure that the casting off is fully finished and secure. Once I've pulled and tightened the loop, I'm also going to make a knot because once again, I'm paranoid and I don't actually know if it helps, but it at least makes me feel better. So with that, you've successfully casted off and made your first piece of your DIY boba holder. We finished. The idea is that we're gonna loop it, attach it all together on both ends, and it'll be a little bit of a cup sleeve. So there's 2 options. You can either cut off both of these ends and use a new string to just attach both these ends together, but I think I'm just gonna keep these ends attached and just weave them through to attach both of these ends. So using the leftover ends of the strings that were from casting on and off, I'm going to be trying to find some gaps as close to the edge of the end of the rectangle as possible. And what I'm basically going to do is weave back and forth the yarn from one end to the other end and then back again. So to make it easier, I'm just poking with my needle first to make the gap a little bit bigger to see where I want to put the yarn in. I'm going to use the needle to poke my yarn through the hole as best as I can and then pull it through with my fingers. And with that, I've kind of done my first quote-unquote stitch. I'm just going to repeat the process of poking, making a gap, stringing the yarn through, pulling it through, and then doing the same thing to the other side. And I'm just kind of going back and forth, under and over, weaving my yarn under one of the ends and poking through before weaving over the other end and then poking through. I kind of just eyeballed this. As long as you end up with the ends attached, it should all work out. And I also tried my best to find gaps that were evenly spaced so there wouldn't be some random holes in between and the stitch would basically look seamless. So it just looked like a perfect sleeve. So hopefully you should end up with something that looks like this. Again, pretty seamless. It looks very nicely attached, I'm going to put a knot down the end that I finished on, snip it off, and there you should be done with your sleeve. And with that done, we can now move on to knitting our handle part of our bubble tea cup holder. Again, we're just gonna cast on the same way we did for our sleeve portion. And the idea is that for this handle, we're gonna be making a really skinny but long rectangle. So we'll actually need fewer stitches. We're only gonna be casting on 7. And don't forget that after knitting the first row, one of them gets dropped, so we're gonna actually end up with 6. And since we want it to be long enough to sling over our shoulders, we'll just need to knit a lot of rows. However, feel free to increase or decrease the stitches as you see fit. This is just kind of a reference of what 6 stitches looks like for the handle, but if you want something thinner, you can feel free to go with lesser stitches. If you want something thicker, you can just do more. But in terms of the number of rows, I think this one you definitely just have to see for yourself how long your handle has gotten, since everyone is different heights and probably has a different preferred length of where they want their cup holder to end. So as I knitted all my rows, I just kept measuring it with my shoulder to see how long it was getting, and then just decided to stop when I thought it was good length. Of course, since we're knitting a lot of rows, I had to put something on. Let me know if you guys have seen Fallout, the TV show. I thought it was pretty good, and I was able to keep knitting my handle to make it a pretty impressive length. Again, as I kept knitting, I kept measuring it with my shoulder to see how long it was getting. Something to keep in mind as well is that, of course, it's yarn, so it's going to stretch as well. So don't be afraid to pull on it to see how stable it is and how tight your stitches are, so you can actually see how long it would be if it were to have weight on it, which it would be with a cup holder. Once you're happy with your length, we're then just going to cast off as we did before, knitting 2 stitches and pulling the original one or the bottom one off of the needle until we're left with our 1 stitch, which we use as our knot, and we securely finish this handle. Now with that done, we're going to use the same weaving method to attach our handle to our cup sleeve. So I'm just going to take one of the ends of my long rectangle and weave it with the top end of the cup sleeve. And same as the cup sleeve, I'm just going to use the leftover ends of casting on and casting off of the handle to do the weaving and attaching. So once again, just using my needle to make a bigger hole, a gap, push my yarn through, and then use my fingers to pull it all the way through. I'm going to put that yarn and weave it over the corner of the cup sleeve and weave it through, and just keep going under and over just like so. Once I've attached the whole end together, I'm going to make a knot to secure everything. And of course, if you're paranoid like me, you're going to also double knot it. But after that, you'll be done attaching one end of your handle to your cup sleeve. Of course, you still have the other handle to do, but you're just going to follow the same steps, and with that, you'll be finished your DIY bubble tea cup holder. Now, before using it, I would definitely double check if there are any gaps or loose ends. Let's see if mine actually works. There's water inside. Pretend it's a cup of boba. This is just one I save. We're gonna go like this. And it works! These stringy things I still have to cut off. It's pretty secure, and I want to do it like this so you can wear it like a purse. And I would say this is a success! Well, that's it for the tutorial, so I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope this really was an easy DIY for you beginner knitters out there, or for anyone like me who's just looking to continue their boba addiction. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more DIYs. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!